Lesson 4.2, Implementing a Curriculum Daily in the Classrooms. A teaching activity is like implementing a minuscule curriculum. A daily lesson is based on a planned or written curriculum, which will be put to action by the teacher in the classroom. So before the lesson ends, the teacher must find out if the students have truly learned. So let us see how this process will be shown. And the good news, DepEd Order Number 70, Series of 2012 states that teachers of all public elementary and secondary schools will not be required to prepare detailed lesson plans. They may adopt daily lesson logs which contain the needed information and guide from the teacher guide and teacher manual, reference material with page number, interventions given to the students, and remarks to indicate how many students have mastered the lesson or are needing remediation. However, teachers with less than 2 years of teaching experience shall be required to prepare daily lesson plans which shall include the following. First, the objectives. Second, subject matter. Third, procedure. Fourth, assessment. And lastly, the assignment. So, as a prospective teachers, we should prepare lesson plans that will comply with the necessary components that are being asked by the Department of Education. So, those who will be employed in the private schools may have a different lesson plan format, but the fundamental parts will be the same. Starting the class right, laying down the curriculum plan. So before the class begins every day, a teacher must have a written lesson plan. What are the main parts of a lesson plan? So the main parts of a lesson plan are: first, objectives or intended learning outcomes or ILO. Second, subject matter or SM. Third, procedure or strategies of teaching. Fourth, assessment of learning outcomes or ALO. And lastly, assignment or agreement. Intended learning outcomes or ILO. So these are the desired learning that will be the focus of the lesson. Learning outcomes are based on taxonomy of objectives presented to us as cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Bloom's taxonomy has been revisited by his own student, Lauren Anderson, and David Kratwell. So this is the original Bloom's taxonomy on 1956. It consists of evaluation, synthesis, analysis, application, comprehension, and knowledge. On the other hand, this is now the revised Bloom's Taxonomy 2001, and it consists of creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and remembering. So, there are three major changes in the revised taxonomy. So, these are: first, changing the names in the 6 categories from nouns to verbs. So, from the original version, it is stated as nouns, while the revised version is stated as verbs, which implies more active form of thinking. And then second, rearranging these categories. In the original version, evaluation is the highest level, while in the revised version, creating is now the highest level. And then lastly, establishing the levels of the knowledge level in the original version. So let's come now to the cognitive categories with the example keywords or verbs. for each in the new version of Bloom's taxonomy. So let's start with remembering as the lowest level of cognitive categories. So remembering, it is recall or retrieve previous learned information. Example keywords: defines, describes, identifies, labels, lists, outlines, selects, and states. Next is understanding. It is comprehend meaning, translation, state problem in own words, making meaning. Example keywords, we have comprehends, explains, distinguishes, estimates, gives examples, interprets, predicts, rewrites, and summarizes. And then applying, it is using concept in new situation, applies what has been learned in new situation. Example keywords, we have applies, changes, computes, operates, constructs, modifies, uses, manipulates, prepares, shows, and solves. And then next, we have analyzing. So it means separating materials or concepts into components parts so that the organization is clear, distinguishes between facts and inferences. Example keywords: breaks down, compares, contrasts, diagrams, differentiates, discriminates, identifies, infers, outlines, relates, selects, and separates. And followed by evaluating. So evaluating, it is making judgments about the value of ideas or materials. So example keywords: appraises, compares, criticizes, defends, describes, discriminates, evaluates, interprets, justifies, and summarizes. And lastly, the highest level of cognition, which is creating. It is building a structure or pattern from various elements, put parts together to create a whole, to make new meaning and structure. So example keywords, we have composes, compiles, designs, generates, modifies, organizes, rearranges, reorganizes, revises, rewrites, summarizes, and creates. In writing objectives or the intended learning outcomes, it is always recommended that more of the higher order thinking skills or HOTS should be developed and less of the low level thinking skills or LOTS for learners. So the low level categories will develop LOTS and thinking skills progress as the categories move higher.
Another revision is the expansion of the concept of knowledge, which was not given emphasis nor discussed thoroughly before. So we will now come to the levels of knowledge. The first one is the factual knowledge. So when we say factual knowledge, it is the ideas, specific data or information. So it is simply also known as the terminologies, specific details, and basic elements within any domain. It is also the information that can and must be learned through exposure, repetition, and commitment to memory. The second one is the conceptual knowledge. Words or ideas known by common name, common features, multiple specific examples, which may either be concrete or abstract. Concepts are facts that interrelate with each other to function together. So, conceptual knowledge is related to factual knowledge. It can be understood as knowing the interrelationships and or functions among the details and elements that make up a larger structure. So basically, conceptual knowledge is knowing that facts can be organized in meaningful ways. The third one, levels of knowledge, is the procedural knowledge. It is how things work, step by step actions, methods of inquiry. So, this knowledge type is critical for success in goal attainment because it puts the what into action through the how process. So, procedural knowledge can be understood as knowledge of subject specific skills and algorithms, subject specific techniques and methods, and criteria for deciding when to use the right procedures. So the last one, levels of knowledge, is the metacognitive knowledge. So it is a knowledge of cognition in general, awareness of knowledge of one's own cognition, thinking about thinking. So this is probably the least paid attention to knowledge type because sometimes it feels uncomfortable to reflect on what is happening inside your world. We fear what we might find. Metacognitive knowledge can be understood as strategic knowledge, knowledge about cognitive tasks, for example, contextual and conditional, and self-knowledge. Intended learning outcomes, or ILO, should be written in a SMART way. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, result-oriented, or the outcomes, and time-bound. So, we will now come first to a subject matter or content, or DSM. So, it comes from a body of knowledge, fact, concept, procedure, and metacognition that will be learned through the guidance of the teacher. Subject matter is the what in teaching. In a plan, this is followed by the references. So the second one is the procedure or methods and strategies. So this is the crux of curriculum implementation. How a teacher will put life to the intended outcomes and the subject matter to be used depends on this component. So let's take a closer view. How will you as a teacher arrange a teaching learning situation which will engage students to learn? Here are some points to remember. The first one is there are many ways of teaching for the different kinds of learners. According to Karpus and Salandanan, 2013, they enumerated the following approaches and methods which may be useful for the different kinds of learners. Some are time-tested methods, while others are non-conventional constructivist methods. So, let's discuss first what is direct demonstration methods. It is guided exploratory, discovery approach, inquiry method, problem-based learning or the PBL, and project method. So, direct method focuses on full immersion in the classroom environment where not one word of the student's native language is spoken. The focus is not on grammar, but instead on learning through listening and speaking. We don't explain the rules to the students. We let them figure it out for themselves. We challenge them and guide them to the correct use of the language, but we also force them to think through things as they learn. Cooperative learning approaches. It is peer tutoring, learning action cells, or what we call the think, pair, share. So, cooperative learning is an instructional method in which students work in small groups to accomplish a common learning goal under the guidance of the teacher. We will now come to the third types of approaches, which is the deductive or the inductive. So it includes the project method, inquiry-based learning. So the fourth one is other approaches, which are included the following: the blended learning, the reflective teaching, the integrated learning, and the outcome-based approach. Teachers have to take into consideration that the different strategies should match with the learning styles of the students. So, students have different learning styles. So, there are many classifications of learning styles according to the different authors. The multiple intelligence theory of Howard Gardner implies several learning styles. But for our lesson, we will just focus on the three learning styles, which are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So these three preferred styles can help teachers choose the method and the materials they will use. So let us discuss first the first one, which is the visual. So when we say visual, it uses graphs, charts, pictures, tends to remember things that are written in form. So, here are the tips for teachers about learners. Turn notes into pictures, diagrams, and maps. Learn the big picture first, then details. Make mind maps and concept maps. The second one characteristic is the auditory. It recalls information through hearing and speaking, prefers to be told how to do things orally, learns aloud. So the tips are: record lectures and listen to this. Repeat materials out loud. Parts, read aloud. The third one is the kinesthetic. Prefers hands-on approach, demonstrates how to do rather than explain, likes group work with hands-on minds on. The tips are: learn something while doing another things, like eat while studying, work while standing, like field work, do many things at one time. And the third one that are included to the points to remember is: teaching and learning must be supported by instructional materials, or the INs. Considering the teaching methodologies and the learning styles, the different support materials should be varied. This will ensure that the individual differences will be considered. Instructional material should complement visual, auditory, and tactile, or a combination of the three. However, following Dahl's cone of learning, which is a visual device, can help teachers to make decisions on what resources and materials will maximize learning. So, here is the cone of learning by Dales. Dale's cone of experience is a visual model that is composed of 11 stages, starting from concrete experiences at the bottom of the cone. Then it becomes more and more abstract as it reaches the peak of the cone. Also, according to Dale, the arrangement in the cone is not based on its difficulty, but rather based on abstraction and on the number of senses involved. So the experiences in each stages can be mixed and are interrelated, that fosters more meaningful learning. So, according to one of the principles in the selection and use of teaching strategies, the more senses that are involved in learning, the more and the better the learning will be. But it does not mean the concrete experience is the only effective experience that educators should use in transferring knowledge to the learning. So, what instructional support materials will the teacher use? According to the learning styles and the outcomes to be achieved, here are some guidelines. So, the first guideline is use of direct purposeful experience through learning by doing retains almost all of the learning outcomes. 90% of learning is retained. Examples are field trip, field study, community immersion, and practice teaching. The second one guideline is participation in class activities, discussion, reporting, and similar activities where learners have the opportunity to talk and write. 70% of learning is remembered. Examples are small group discussion, buzz session, individual reporting, role play, and panel. The third one is passive participation, as in watching a movie, viewing exhibit, watching demonstration will retain around 50% of what has been communicated. The fourth one, by just looking at still pictures, paintings, illustrations, and drawings will allow the retention of around 30% of the material content. The fifth one, by hearing, as in lecture, sermon, monologues, only 20% is remembered. The last one guideline is reading will ensure 10% remembering of the material. So regardless of the amount of remembering from the concrete to abstract, each layer contributes to learning and requires instruction support materials. So in visual, concrete, flat, three-dimensional, realias, modules, and etc. are abstract. It includes the verbal symbols and words. So in audio, it involves the recording of sounds, natural or artificial. Audio visual, it includes the combination of what can be seen and heard. So in kinesthetic, it includes the manipulated materials like modeling clay, rings, dumbbells, equipments, and others. So in experiential, it utilizes all modalities. So the fourth one in point to remember is the methods and materials must implement the plan or taking action.
So we have here the example lesson plan in science. So the first part is the objectives or the intended learning outcomes, and it has four ILO, which are: tell that force is applied to move objects, describe that pushing or pulling with the force moves objects, state that if force moves the object away from the person, it is a push, state that if the force moves the object towards the person, it is a pull. So those four intended learning outcomes are the things that are expected by the teachers to learn from the students at the end of the discussion or at the end of the lesson. So those four are the things that will be tested and measured if it will be achieved by the students. And then the second part is the subject matter. So the subject matter has five components, which are the topic, the references, science concepts, science processes, and the materials that will be needed in the lesson. So, in order to achieve the intended learning outcomes that we gave or presented to our students, we must have a procedure. So, these are the processes and activities that we are going to implement in the classroom, and it should be aligned to the intended learning outcomes and the subject matter. So, in our previous discussion, we have mentioned different methods that a teacher should use and the different learning styles of the students. So it should anchored or it should be aligned so that the implementation of the curriculum will be effective. So the fourth part is the assessment of the learning outcomes. So in these parts, after we gave them the activities or after the procedure, we are now going to assess or how much our students learned from the lesson. So we may give quizzes or tests or activities for our students to do. So in the examples given, it has 5 questions wherein the students are going to circle the letter of the correct answer. So the last part is the assignment. So in here, in the assignments, the teacher may give students the assignments that is related to their discussions or the subject matter. So it is a way that the students can continue their learning at their home, and also in terms of assignments, the teachers may give them assignments that is related to the next topic or further tomorrow's topic. So in this case, it will help the students to have a advanced knowledge about the topics that they are going to discuss next meeting. So in this case, in the example lesson plan, the teachers gave assignments to the students wherein it is they are going to list 4 objects that they can push or pull, and they are going to answer the questions, what did you use to pull or push the objects? So the assignment is related to the subject matter or to their topic, which is pushing or pulling moves objects.
And the last one point to remember is finding out what has been achieved, assessing achieved outcomes. So at the end of the activity, the teacher will find out if the intended learning outcomes or the ILO have been converted into achieved learning outcomes or the ALO. Tests and other tools are utilized at the end of the lesson to identify this. What knowledge, process understanding, and performance or the KPUP are demonstrated by the learners. The rule of thumb is what has been taught should be measured to find out if the intended outcomes set at the beginning has been achieved.
Lesson planning is at the heart of being an effective teacher. So planning lesson plan ahead of time means teachers enter the classroom each day fully prepared to teach new concepts and lead meaningful discussion. Therefore, implementing a curriculum daily in the classrooms is important. So that's the end of our reports, and I hope that you learned something about implementing a curriculum daily in the classroom. Thank you, guys.